Okay, are we able to see that?
Yes.
Building an inclusive dojo. Okay, we are going to go ahead and get started then. Good morning, everyone. How is JUDOCon today?
Good.
Excellent. Okay, we're going to go right into the session. This is going to be kind of a long one, an hour and a half. And so I'm going to make this as interesting as we can. So this is building an inclusive dojo. This is special needs and adaptive judo. So just a little bit about me. I'm a severe special education teacher, and I'm actually just entering my 20th year of service with my school district. I'm also in the final stages of earning my instructional coaching endorsement. An instructional coach is a teacher of teachers. It's a provider of professional development. So I should be able to submit that for endorsement of my license in a week or two. So a bit more about me. I personally train students and I award rank in Judo, Hapkido, and Taekwondo. I hold a fourth Dan in both Judo and Hapkido, and I actually hold a sixth Dan in Taekwondo. And if you look over at the far left, you can see kind of a blurry photo from the 1980s. And that guy just in the front there is me. That would have been maybe 88 or 89, I believe. So at this point, I have multiple former students who have their own clubs in various states. I do currently serve as the Utah State President under Utah Judo, and I currently serve as the Vice Chair of the Western United States under the Global Hapkido Association, which is one of the largest Hapkido associations in the world. So I also have a strong interest, and I've done some work in the areas of Judo, Taekwondo, and Taekwondo history, especially in the area of onomastics, which is the study of names. So one interesting thing about me and the program I help run, I have about 200 students currently, and about 1 in 5 of my students is neurodiverse. But I don't run specialty classes or private lessons. Instead, the high ratios of persons who are neurodiverse that I serve develop through word of mouth and through online neurodiverse communities. So I just want to be clear, there is nothing wrong with running specialty classes or private classes tailored to the individuals who may be neurodiverse. In fact, I believe there's some advantages to doing things that way. And there are also other frameworks of inclusion that you could use other than the inclusion framework that I'm going to teach today. So Lauren Meese, she and I did a video for the USJA back in December. And if you don't know Lauren, she's a 2000 Olympian, and she is also an adult woman with autism who's open about it. And she and I did a video back in December that you may be able to find on Facebook or elsewhere, talking about some tactics for how to approach this. The Riverside Dojo in California does absolutely wonderful and enlightened work, as do many others actually in the States and elsewhere. So there's any number of good inclusion frameworks that already exist. This is just one. So I'm not going to be showing you the one correct high holy way to do this. What I'm showing you is an option. And the framework for inclusion that I use for persons with differences or disabilities is what's called the Universal Design for Learning, or UDL. Okay, let's get into some housekeeping before we get into the main presentation. Real quick, is everyone able to hear me pretty well? Okay, I see nods, very good. Okay, before we begin, let's talk about 4 norms about our behavior today. Okay, these are 4 things I'm asking that we all do, myself included. So number 1, let's be fully present. Let's really focus on what we're doing right now. Something I teach my kids is the idea of ichigo ichie. Focus on this moment, okay? Number 2, I'd like you to engage actively. There's going to be quite a few times today we're going to pause for partner conversation. That's going to be a big part of today's presentation. There's going to be frequent opportunities for you to have conversation to talk about your impressions of what we're going over. Okay. I ask that you treat all opinions with courtesy. That goes both for me and your partners. And so we're not saying you have to agree. We're not saying you don't have a fabulous different way to do this. All we're asking is courtesy during the conversations. Okay. And number four, I ask that you honor the underlying principles and philosophies of judo. So we are going to be frequently stopping for partner conversation. And just to be clear, I'm not very interested in trying to convince you to adopt my vision for judo or even to use the techniques I use for inclusion. That's not what I want. Instead, what I want to do is give you an opportunity to reflect on your vision of judo and your method of inclusion. I do so because I suspect that you are already serving neurodiverse individuals, even if you're not aware of it. And I want to help you figure out what techniques might work well in your dojo and reflect your personal approach to judo. I'm not interested in teaching you my approach to judo. I'm simply creating possibilities for you to reflect on your approach to judo and how that can fit into an inclusive framework. Yeah, I'm going to pre-teach a little vocabulary today because some of these may not be familiar terms. So let's just be clear when we use these following vocabulary items, what we're actually talking about. So andragogy is the education of adults. Pedagogy is the education of children. A universal design for learning, or UDL, it's a flexible educational framework designed to meet the diverse needs of all learners. So inclusion is a policy of providing equal educational access for learners who might otherwise be excluded, including and especially those with disabilities. So autism is a developmental difference or disorder affecting social interaction, communication, sensory processing, and behavior. And neurodiversity are the natural variations in human brain functioning, such as autism, ADHD, or dyslexia. Okay, so we're going to pause here. And what I'd like you to do is partner up into ones, maybe twos, maybe threes. Find a partner or two. If it has to be a partnership of three, fine. And I want you to discuss if you've ever had an opportunity to work with an individuals with differences or disabilities in a judo capacity. And while respecting the privacy of individuals, perhaps share an experience. So let's pause and do that. I'm going to set a timer for 2 minutes on the board. And go ahead and begin, please. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, let's be back together in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, thank you so much for sharing those stories. Let's go ahead and let's get ready to move on. Okay, today's learning target. Participants will design and evaluate judo instruction that is inclusive for all students by applying a universal design for learning. We're going to have 4 objectives today that's going to break that down a bit. Number 1, we're going to map the 3 UDL networks, representation, engagement, and expression, to judo pedagogy by listing 2 concrete adaptations for each network that you could implement in your next class. Number 2, I'd like you to audit your own dojo using the tree checklist and identify at least 3 sensory or environmental barriers, plus a matching adaptation for each. 3, I'd like you to construct a 4-level proficiency scale for a chosen throw, for example, Ogoshi, that integrates technical mechanics and a related adaptive behavior goal for each level. And number 4, design a brief inclusive drill that, number 1, embeds at least 1 UDL strategy, 2, is ready for trial when you return to your home dojo. We're going to tackle 4 sections today. Number 1 is housekeeping. Number 2 is overview of the universal design for learning. Section 3 is a bit of a deep dive into history and theory. And section 4 are the strategies and tactics of UDL. And that'll include UDL networks, scaffolding, prompts and cues, supporting adaptive behavior, and differentiation. Okay, our objectives. Number 1, map the 3 UDL networks. Number 2, dojo sensory audit. Number 3, create a 4-level proficiency scale. Number 4, design a brief inclusive drill. So in this presentation, we're going to be using andragogy, which is the training and teaching of adults as opposed to children. But the actual teaching you're going to be planning to do is using pedagogy. Okay. Andragogy is the professional development of fully trained adults acting in a professional role within an area of pre-established competence. Now, andragogy in the US is a little bit different than how that term is used internationally in Europe. So in the US, it really tends to mean the training of professional adults acting within their area of trained competence. And that's what we're going to be focusing on today. So in this sense, at JUDOCON, andragogy in this usage should be understood as the education of judo coaches. And that's a great fit. Steve Scott is one of the best providers in the US of andragogy for judo. There are others, but Steve's one of the best. Okay. So adult professional learners are a little bit different. So when you train or when you professionally develop or upskill an adult professional learner, like all of you are, judo coaches, or what you're aspiring to be, we need to build on your pre-established experience because that's substantial at this point. We want the learning to be useful right now, not later. We want the learning to solve a relevant problem within your area of trained competence, and we recognize that your motivation is from within. Okay, we're going to head into section 2, overview of universal design for learning. Okay, I want to real quickly just review our learning target. We are here today to design and evaluate judo instruction that is inclusive of all students by applying a universal design for learning, a UDL. So in this presentation, I'm going to focus on neurodiversity in general and autism specifically in this presentation. But please understand the frameworks we are discussing are applicable to any difference or disability. The UDL framework can be applied across age groups with differing ages, disability categories, or English language learner status. So in this next slide, I'm teaching a group of 3 and 4-year-olds. Some may be neurodiverse, some may be not, okay? And just to give you a quick explanation of what happens, I move the students from sitting on the wall to the crash pad. We want to get those little bodies up and moving. I provide them with visual cues by pointing to white cones, marking the destination where I'm going to send them. And the students are given a chance to respond before moving. I gave them specific praise for correct responses. Good job pointing. I provide verbal prompts, point to the white cones, ready, set, go. And I brought the students back to ensure everyone followed directions before proceeding when a miscue occurred. So this is showing that even with 3 and 4-year-olds who may be neurodiverse, you can use this structure successfully. So let's take a look. Point to the white cones. We're going to go sit in the white cones. Point to the white cones. Job pointing down. Job pointing Asher. Good job pointing Mac and Neva. Job Zara. Okay, when I say go, ready, set, go. Okay, so let's talk about how this aligns with UDO. Means of representation. I used visual markers of the white cones to show the location I wanted them to go to. And I paired this with spoken instructions with gestures for clarity. In terms of means of engagement, I incorporated an interactive element pointing to the cones to keep the students' focus sharp. And I provided positive verbal feedback to increase their motivation. And in terms of means of action and expression, students responded physically by pointing and through movement to the cones. I allowed processing time before saying go to support varied response needs. So let's answer the question of why all this matters. Well, one reason is you're already doing this. You're probably already training neurodiverse individuals. Okay. And I think that today there's a much greater awareness of neurodiversity in 2025 than what there was when I started in this field 25 years ago. So, in short, you're already serving this population. And frankly, you've likely always served this population. For example, looking at autism specifically, recent empirical studies demonstrate the significant positive impacts of judo programs on motor skills, psychosocial behaviors, social integration, and autism symptom severity among individuals with autism. And I've listed some of those studies below. Judo brings benefits, but the research shows that there are also barriers to inclusion for neurodiverse persons, such as those with intellectual disability, autism, and ADHD, that can lead to low rates of participation. Quoting directly from one research article, individuals with intellectual disability face numerous barriers to inclusion in sports, many of which are rooted in their social environment. The social environment would be, in this case, the sport environment or the judo dojo. Judoka with autism and other disabilities face barriers to participation that's been noted in the research, such as limited coach knowledge, poorly adapted programs, and weak family coach communication. And there are other key obstacles, and this includes motor coordination differences, which can suppress participation, need for extra supervision, and behavior or adaptive behavior support challenges. So this is why you should care. Researchers found that coaches' belief, norms, and sense of control are central predictors of whether inclusion succeeds in judo. So there is a secret weapon in judo. It's you, or it's us. We're the secret sauce. We're the secret ingredient, so to speak. Quoting from the research, in combat sports like judo, instructors can face challenges in balancing group needs and maintaining group cohesion, which can create barriers to effective inclusion. So it's hard for us coaches and sensei too. So we have a hard time at times balancing the needs of the group and maintaining group cohesion, and then overcoming some of those barriers to participation for persons with differences or disabilities. And it's okay to acknowledge that there's some struggles with this. And I think this is where universal design for learning comes in and can be so helpful. It can be a powerful support for coaches planning on inclusion in their dojo. In its essence, UDL is a broad strategic framework for how lessons in any subject are planned and implemented. This is not a list of tactics. This is not a list of do these three things and you're going to be set. This is a really broad strategic framework that allows for a lot of variation and individualization based on the teacher or the coach, based on the individuals who may be present. It's a broad idea that, when fulfilled accurately, leads to a lesson that's universally applicable. And I think it's natural but wrong to understand UDL as a dichotomy. So I think it's natural but wrong to see this as, hey, we have the general judo lesson plan we're going to do today, and then here's what we're going to do to adapt it for Bobby, who has a difference or a disability. I think you can do that. I think a lot of people do that. I think that does and can work, but that's not quite what UDL is. So as opposed to being two separate things, UDL actually combines those things into one thing. The lesson is designed for all students present. That means you have to have some knowledge of who's going to be present and what you actually need to do to support them. So the universal design for learning is the proactive planning to address the educational support needs of all students present. It's the adaptations and variations offered, which are open to all the students as opposed just to one or two particular students, okay? And that these adaptations and supports will in fact serve as powerful supports for students beyond those for whom it was first intended. So you do have to have a lesson plan going in. You do have to proactively plan how you're going to meet everyone's needs, but you're not making an adaptation, an accommodation, or a modification for one or two kids. You're literally building it into their lesson plan and making it work for everyone. And that adding in these extra supports won't just be good for those one or two students with differences or disabilities. It's literally going to be better for everyone. UDL uses multiple means of representation, which is how the lesson is represented to the students. It uses multiple means of engagement, which is how the students engage in their practice. And it uses multiple means of expression, which is how the students demonstrate mastery of the lesson. Okay, so once again, the underlying principles are representation, engagement, and expression. So multiple means of representation is the what. So some simple judo examples would be teaching ogoshi, a 10-second silent demo followed by a group drill with verbal cues, followed by using color-coded footprints if needed for visual support while working on the mechanics of the throw. Okay. We also can have multiple means of engagement, which is the why. Some examples would be warming up the athletes, choosing grip tag as opposed to a standard warm-up. Maybe as opposed to doing line-based ukemes, we could do an ukeme circuit, or we could do shatter uchikomis. So we could do 60-second rounds with a big countdown clock on the wall. And finally, multiple means of expression, the how. So some simple judo examples would be, in order to pass off ogoshi, the athlete can A, perform 3 clean reps, or they can show it in light randori, or they could verbally break down the components verbally and demonstrate the throw. So before we go any further, let's pause and take a deep dive into some history and educational theory so that we can understand why UDL is a good fit for judo. And because this is me, and because I have an interest in judo history, that this is going to be a bit more detailed, maybe than some presentations, but that's kind of my trademark. Okay, section 3, history and theory. So most of us probably know that there are 4 main pedagogical constructs of judo instruction. Okay, now some persons add shiai or competition to this list, and some people omit some of these that are currently listed, but I think most authorities agree on these 4, with some exception. So we have forms, kata, we have lecture or ko, we have dialogue or questions and answers, so mundo, and then we have free practice or randori. So, three of the four parts of the traditional pedagogy seen in judo, namely formulaic practice or kata, lectures ko, and questions and answers mondo, also have some overlap to traditional pillars of pedagogy in the study of the Chinese classics that would have been used historically in China and Korea and Japan. But that's not directly their source. The judo practices are more closely tied to the pedagogy within the Japanese school system as it was evolving in the 1870s and 1880s. So prior to the advent of the Meiji Restoration in 1868, you had different kinds of schools in Japan. You had regional official schools for the samurai. You had temple schools for the townsfolk. You had private schools that charged tuition. You had Confucian academies for the upper crust. And you actually had professional or scholarship think tanks. And then you had something really unique called Dutch schools. So, beginning in the late 1700s, these private schools taught Western subjects in very geographically isolated areas to relatively few and controlled individuals. Okay. So, during the Edo Jidai, so the Tokyo period or the early modern period in Japan, education for common people mainly focused on moral teachings based on the Neo-Confucianism of Shusi, who lived 1130 to 1200 of the Common Era, which was also the official policy of the government of Japan at the time, which was the Tokugawa shogunate. Okay. This moral education evolved alongside the Teragoya, which are the Teragoya schools, which are temple schools for the children of the townsfolk, or the Shijuku, the private academies for children of the well-off merchants or samurai. The Teragoya mostly used classical methods to teach the Chinese classics. The Teragoya schools were widespread. This contributed to a high literacy rate, 60% by the end of the early modern period in 1868, and the literacy rate was even higher in Edo, or Tokyo. In the Japanese early modern period of 1603 to 1868, that preceded the Meiji Restoration, Japanese children were seen as passive recipients of knowledge. But there were some counterexamples to that. Early education reformers like Ashita Baigan, who lived 1685 to 1774, provided a form of moral philosophy in the Teragoya that better aligned with the values and life experiences of the merchant class of the period. Baigan's theory was known as Shingaku, or heart learning, and Baigan's methods also differed from a rote study of the classics. His new methods consisted of education using material derived from Japanese sources, such as parables, poems, and lullabies. However, not all Teragoya schools adopted Ashita Baigan's methods, and many continued to simply teach a basic version of the Chinese Confucian classics. In the Meiji Restoration, after the beginning of mandatory education, reformers skewered the Teragoya schools for a lack of quality and rigor. Many were merely poor imitations of superior Confucian-style schools. They had all the rote and none of the rigor. The government of the Edo Jidai, the Tokugawa shogunate, fell in 1868, but the Japanese education reformers of the 1870s and 1880s studied Western-style education and the philosophies behind it. They made use of these new ideas. Their goal was nothing less than the recreation of Japan. They were using the compulsory education to empower the new Japanese government and create a sense of Japanese national identity, which was one that supported the new Japanese government. But the education reformers had some serious work to do. During the onset of the Meiji Restoration, the end of the shogunate, the pro-imperial reformists moved away from the Bakufu, or the shogunate's variation of Shusi Neo-Confucianism. The early Meiji regime had to grapple with establishing an identity that functioned with both the samurai class and the commoners. Many of both groups favored the preceding Tokugawa shogunate. The initial years of the Meiji era were marred by stunning inflation and resistance to conscription, and also against compulsory education that led to widespread social discontent. From 1852 to 1867, Japan witnessed 132 peasant revolts. It also witnessed multiple rebellions from former samurai, the last and most serious of which was the Satsuma Rebellion, which ended the same year as Jigoro Kano first began to study jujitsu, and just 5 years before he founded Judo. A variation of Shusei Neo-Confucianism had been the official policy of the Tokugawa shogunate, and was for the same reason it seemed badly suited as the foundation for the emerging Meiji regime. So reformers sought constance in Japaneseness to prevent collapse under rapid modernization. And it was in this period that concepts like kokutai, which is the Japanese national identity, and kokumin, the Japanese citizen, entered broad usage. And just real quick, does anyone recognize the term kokumin from any title in judo? How about the Seiryoku Zenyu Kokumin Taikyo, right? The national form of physical fitness. That uses that term as well. So scholarship shows that the Meiji government viewed education as a strategic tool for nation building. The introduction of Western educational practices was part of a broader effort to modernize Japan and strengthen its position globally, especially in the face of Western expansion. After the Meiji Restoration began, Japanese reformist educators who were part of the Meiji government in the 1870s viewed children as active and autonomous with inherent capacities for sensory learning. The shift from traditional to modern educational systems was not without its challenges. Balancing the Western concept with Japanese traditions created tensions that required careful navigation by educational reformers like Fukuzawa Yokichi. Their writings and ideas were influential in promoting Western-style education while maintaining and, in fact, actually creating a Japanese identity. And this was not always successful. For example, Mori Arinori was Japan's first minister of education and a former Satsuma samurai. Arinori was a member of this Society of Meiji Six, who were immensely influential in defining early compulsory education in Japan. Jigoro Kano had actually worked with Arinori on a committee that in 1888 published an ethics text, a textbook for use of the middle and normal schools. This Rinrisho textbook was deliberately designed to align with Herbert Spencer's work, The Principle of Ethics. Fun side note, Mori Arinori was assassinated 1 year after the ethics textbook was published by one of Jigoro Kano's early judo students, Nishido Bantaro. The curriculum in the new education system was a mix of Western and Japanese elements. Subjects like science and mathematics were introduced alongside traditional subjects. Teacher training programs were established, emphasizing new teaching methodologies. And the adaptation of Pestalozzian methods marked a shift from rote learning to a more interactive and child-centered approach. So just to be clear, Pestalozzian methods refers to the practices developed by Johann Heinrich Pestalozzi, who lived 1746 to 1827. He was a Swiss education reformer. His approach to education was revolutionary for its time and had a significant influence on modern educational theories that followed later in the 1800s. So while the Rinrisho ethics textbook was primarily based on Herbert Spencer's work, the broader moral education, the Shushinho, used by the Japanese public education system, was more dominantly influenced by the theories of Pestalozzi. In my own experience, Pestalozzi is somewhat forgotten about in American education, except in American early childhood education, where he remains quite respected. Pestalozzi advocated for learning through head, heart, and hands, promoting an active and sensory-based methodology of education. Pestalozzi's theories directly influenced the moral education in Japan. They also partially shaped Spencer's work, which the Japanese government likewise adopted to help create the new educational frameworks. This moral education was fundamental to establishing the new Japanese Meiji government and the emerging Japanese sense of national identity. The goal was never to create a westernized citizen, but rather to use education as a method of nation building in the 1880s in Japan. So Jigoro Kano had received formal postgraduate training in ethics, and he was highly familiar with these new social ethical frameworks. Kano integrated these educational frameworks into judo. So, for example, let's look at a Japanese Pestalozzian book. This is from the Japanese Revised Art of Teaching, published in 1883. 1. Animation is the inborn nature of the child. Train him through activity, train him through hand. 2. Develop the power of sentiments in accordance with the natural order. First create the sentiments, and afterwards give it substance. Now, that's a little wordy by today's standards, so I'll break that down. Teach the child why he should want to do something, why he should be interested to it. Build a sentiment towards it first, and then afterwards, teach the subject. Okay. Number 3, begin with the 5 senses. What is possible for the child to discover through the use of their own faculties should not be explained by the teacher. And from the same text regarding moral education, in order to improve the virtues of all children, instruction, exemplars, and practice are required. So one of the practical methods used to accomplish this is Mundo. It's a question and answer session using real objects, drawing, and visual aids to engage the child and make learning more interesting. The teacher's role becomes one of drawing out truths the child already possesses in a sensory form and helping these evolve into conscious thought. So the 3-culture model of judo is inspired by the 1861 book, Education, Intellectual, Moral, and Physical, by British utilitarian philosopher Herbert Spencer, who lived 1820 to 1903. So in Japan, this is known as Saniku Shugi, and Spencer's ideas of emphasizing a complete education through balancing intellectual, moral, and physical teaching became deeply rooted in the Japanese public education system in the 1880s. These 3 educations, Saniku Shugi, were embraced by Jigoro Kano as part of the underlying purpose and philosophy of judo. And there's some really wonderful work by the judo scholar Lance Gatling, really deep diving into this if you want a good exploration. I really heavily recommend you take a look at his works. He's done some phenomenal work in this area. So let's do some comparing and contrasting between some of the methods for teaching moral education in Meiji area Japanese public schools and also in judo. So in the public schools, you have kokun, or instruction, and in judo, we have ko, or lecture. In the public schools, you have mohan, or exemplars, and in judo, we have kata, or patterns. In the public schools, we have renshu, or practice, and in judo, we have rendori, which is our free exercises. And in both, you have the concept of mundo, which is dialogue or questions and answers. So you can see there is a fair bit of overlap, and you can see the connection from Herbert Spencer's work as it was being interpreted by the Japanese school system, and then what was taken into judo. So while we can see a clear connection to Kano's work in both Herbert Spencer and Pestalozzi, here we must again be careful not to overlimit where Kano took inspiration. Kano was influenced by a wide range of thinkers. I think it's most correct to say that Kano bought and sold his ideas using the intellectual currencies of his day. And while he sometimes explained his ideas using secular or Western philosophy, he also sometimes would explain his ideas using terminology or concepts derived from traditional portions of Japanese culture. So all that being said, it is true that a significant portion of Kano's core judo philosophy was closely tied to Western philosophies, and especially Herbert Spencer. And this has been understood, at least at a basic level, for quite a long time, both in the Japanese publications and in the Western publications. And I list some examples below. And it wasn't just Kano. Spencer was arguably the most influential philosopher in both Europe and Japan in the latter half of the 1800s. In the 1870s in Japan, the Gono, or wealthy farmers, actually sponsored village study groups for lesser farmers and other provincials, where they read Western politics and studied Spencer and other Western philosophers. So one of the persons who Pestalozzi also influenced was a lady named Maria Montessori, who lived from 1870 to 1952, and she was a early special education pioneer. So when we talk about Pestalozzi's learning by head, heart, and hands, we can also talk about the adjacent theories: Herbert Spencer's educational theory, the Meiji Japanese educational constructs, the pedagogy of judo, but also Maria Montessori's special education work. So all of these things are adjacent and share a lineage and a degree of alignment in terms in both their terminology and also in their methodology. Okay, we're going to move into section 4, our final section, the strategies and tactics of UDL. So once again, in UDL, we have the idea of representation, engagement, and expression. So let's begin to really break this down. Let's talk about multiple means of representation, which is the what. So some things about multiple means of representation: we can show the technique 3 ways, using a silent demonstration, narrated steps and videos. We can highlight features, the kazushi, the line of force, the dead angle, etc. We can use tape lines and arrows on the floor, or using paper footprints to show proper foot placement and evolutions. We can add tactile cues, tape markers on the judo gi sleeves to show where to grip. We can post a visual schedule so that learners know the sequence. Okay. So let's take a look at this video. Okay, so in that group, you had a youth leader who rang a bell, and that was a signal for all the students to sit and to stop what they were doing and focus on her. She gave a verbal direction and an explanation of what their group choices were and what they would be studying. She had them actually point to where they were going next to make a decision and engage, and then she rang a bell the second time to get them to a transition. Okay, I'd like us to pause here. I'd like you to work with 1 or 2 partners to identify 2 multiple means of representation that might be a good fit for your dojo. You can use these examples, or you're welcome to come up with your own. Okay, so let's give this 2 minutes on the clock. I'd like you to partner up. You're welcome to stand up if you need to stand to do this. Get a good stretch. And let's go ahead and begin now, please. And I will put some examples on the board for you. So you're going to figure out 2 things you can do to have multiple means of representation. And you're welcome to create your own examples as well. Okay, 1 minute remains. Okay, everyone, let's be back together in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, thank you for wrapping up those conversations. Okay, let's talk about multiple means of engagement, which is the why. So, some examples would be offering a choice of station, role, or drill variation, using short rounds with timers and clear goals, so micro drills, providing tiered challenges using progressions or regressions, forward or backward chains for skills, and building peer connections, so helping to create stable partnerships, positive feedback opportunities between partners. Okay, so let's take a look of one example what that could look like. So if you notice in the far right corner, adults are doing uchikomi to finish their warm up. But on the left corner, the novice youth, are playing a judo gripping tag game. Okay. So that'd be one example of offering multiple means of engagement. Okay, let's pause again. And I'd like you to work with one or two partners. You can use the same, you can pick some new ones. And I'd like you to talk about multiple means of engagement. I'd like you to figure out two different ways that you could use multiple means of engagement that might be a good fit for your program in your judo club. Okay. You can use these examples or come up with your own. And let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to set the timer for 2 minutes. Ready, set, go. Okay, my friends, let's be back together in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Thank you for being ready. Okay, thanks for having those conversations and taking a look at this. Okay, finally, let's talk about multiple means of expression, which is the how. So let the learners choose how they show the mastery, how they demonstrate mastery or their learning, such as live demonstrations and explanation of the components, showing the technique in a kata segment or in randori. We're allowing for multiple supports like visual cues, use of a spotter, partial prompting, and then fading those extra cues to independence. And we could accept different modalities of this expression. We could use spoken, signed, visual responses for tactile explanations. If you have a student who uses a voice output device, you could accept that. And once again, some simple judo examples would be to pass off ogoshi. The athlete can perform 3 clean reps or show it in randori or verbally break it down into components of the throw. So let me give you an example. So this is multiple means of expression. Thank you for being ready and sitting so quiet, everyone. Okay, you have 3 choices. If you go to Mr. Kite, can you raise your hand? You're going to be practicing Taekwondo form number 1, chin in the sky, okay? And you're going to be using the line support of having 3 lines. If you come to Mr. Slansky, will you raise your hand? You're going to still be doing the form, but you're going to be using it without the support of the 3 lines. And if you come to Mr. Bingham, can you raise your hand? I want you to work on figuring out an application for one section of the form. It could be any application you want. Okay. I want you to take your... So they were all working on learning the same thing, but on different levels of expression. So for one group, they were simply would do the Taekwondo form I asked them to do. And the second group, they'd also do that, but they were giving cones to help serve as a physical prompt and a visual reminder of what it is they needed to do next. And in the final group, they were going upskill a bit, and they were actually working on taking the form that they were taught and figuring out an application for it. So they were given 3 different choices based on their current abilities and skills that they could choose for how they would express their learning. Okay, we're going to pause again real quick. I'm going to have you do the same thing again. I'd like you to work with 1 to 2 partners to identify 2 multiple means of representation that might be a good fit for your dojo. So you can use these examples or come up with your own. Okay, I'll give you 2 minutes. Ready, set, let's begin. Okay, my friends, let's be back together in five, four, three, two, one. Okay, thank you so much. Okay, so let's consider two adaptations for each UDL network. So I want you to review in your head the two concrete adaptations that you're going to use possibly next week. So the two you created for representation, the what, the two you created for engagement, the why, and the two you created for expression, the how. So as you consider these things, scaffolds are useful in setting up these UDL networks. A scaffold cues the right actions using visual, verbal, tactile, or social cues. It reduces uncertainty and it increases success. And we fade supports as independence grows. So, in American education, we often talk about the gradual release of responsibility. This generally describes the behavior of the teacher as the teacher relinquishes increasing independence and responsibility of learning in a given lesson to the student. So, as the teacher's responsibility goes down, the student's responsibility rises. And this concept has a philosophical parallel in the idea of shu, ha, ri, or protect, break, and separate. While both describe learning towards mastery, shu, ha, ri describes the behavior of the learner, while gradual release of responsibility describes the behavior of the teacher. The shu, ha, ri theory, which is also known as su, pa, i in the Korean Taekwondo and Hapkido literature, this is a concept that appears to have first emerged in Japanese Aikido post World War II and which has probable roots in older Japanese traditions in Noa theater. Okay, let's take a look at some scaffolds during Bowen. So in this next video, I'm going to take a class that consists of both neurotypical individuals, typically developing persons, and persons who are neurodiverse. And I know one of the areas that they struggle is to line up correctly. And so I'm going to bring them out one belt group at a time, and I'm going to stand and use my physical proximity to cue them where to be. Okay, so let's take a look. Okay. Okay, scaffolds for more sophisticated learners could include educational prompts and cues. So a cue is an attention signal. It draws a learner's attention to what matters. Okay. That's already present. And a prompt is added help. It gives extra guidance about how or where to respond or solve. So let's look at this. This is a prompts versus cues table. Okay. So given the judo situation of grip fighting or kumikata, the prompt is the added guidance on the far right. I could say things like, take the sleeve first at the elbow with your left hand, then collar, keeping your elbows down. But if I wanted to go up a bit and make it a little bit less spoon feedy, I could use a cue. And what I could do instead of saying all that, I could lightly tap the opponent's sleeve near the elbow to highlight an open sleeve grip. Okay. If I'm looking at the kazushi for osotogari, I could say, if I'm using a prompt, step outside with your right foot, pull the sleeve left while driving your right arm back. Okay. But if I wanted to use a cue, I could use floor arrow tape showing the backward diagonal off balance line. Okay. And I could gesture along that line. For an uchikomi rhythm drill, we could count 1, 2, 3, 4, step, turn, lift, fit, repeat. And we also could clap to mark the entry timing if we wanted to make it a bit less distinct, getting the students to really focusing on those details without having it spoon fed. For kami or break falls, I could say tuck chin, slap with the whole arm, exhale and impact. Or I could use a tape stripe on the mat to show the slap zone. And I could use a soft beat before the roll. Okay. When I follow down in a waza transition, I could follow down, wrap the far hip, blocking at the knee, settle into kesagatame. Or I could point to the opponent's far hip as they land and use that as an attention to the control point. And for something like escaping kesagatame, um, I could say frame on the uke's hip, bridge towards the head, walk your hips out, swim the arm through. Or I could tap the athlete's trapped shoulder to highlight what's actually pinned. Okay. So those are some examples of when you want to use a bit more support, have a higher level scaffold with a prompt, or if you want to use a little bit lower support to get the student really thinking and paying attention to what they need to do without just giving it to them. And there's actually another more sophisticated type of educational prompt as well. What is meant by prompt in this case is question asking by the teacher that directs their learner's attention to where they can find or research the answer on their own. So it's actually even more sophisticated. So here are some examples. Sensei, I think this throw I learned is actually a variation, not the original throw. And so the coach could say, okay, where could you find out what the original throw looks like to double check that? And then they'd have to think that through. Where can I find this answer? Where can I research this? Oh, right. The Kodokan has a YouTube channel. I could check on there and see if what I'm doing is the OG version or whether this is someone's variation. Okay. And a second example could be Sensei, I can't get out of his kesagatame. The escape I learned isn't working. And so as a coach or teacher, we could say, okay, so what do you think your next step should be? Do you think the problem is in the escape? Do you think the problem is maybe this just isn't a good fit for his body type versus your body type? Where could we dive into that a little bit? Are we making errors in the technique, or is there something else going on here? Okay. So as you plan to proactively support adaptive behavior as part of your UDL lesson, let's define what it is. Adaptive behavior can be understood as socially appropriate or perhaps age appropriate behavior. Adaptive behavior includes the ability to regulate emotion, interact socially, and make appropriate behavioral decisions. These behaviors are commonly categorized into 3 domains: conceptual, social, and practical skills. And I think adaptive behavior is particularly important when planning for inclusion in judo because we know, going back to the start of the presentation, that adaptive behavior struggles, socially appropriate behavior struggles are one of the great barriers to inclusion for neurodiverse individuals or individuals with disabilities. So we understand that adaptive behavior is having 3 subtypes: conceptual, social, and practical. And if I were to break it down, conceptual in judo would be things like the terminology and vocabulary, the various symbols, sequences like belt order and mat zones. Okay. Teaching the bow in for a shiai. All those would be examples of conceptual. Social would include things like communication, cooperation, and respectful conduct while training. And practical would be routines, the wearing and carrying of the judo uniform, and transitions between activities. So let's pause and let's consider a quick self-audit of your dojo. And we're going to use the tree framework. Okay. Now, this is an interesting framework. It has been applied to judo in the past. It's actually out of Australia. And I think it's really useful as we plan what could be different in our own dojo. So in just a second with a partner, I'd like you to audit what you might be using now, and then reflect with a partner using the screen what you might like to do further or start using. And so once again, there's no requirement to use any of these. You could go your own way with this. We have the idea in tree that we have variations in teaching style, variation of rules and routines, variations in the environment, variations in the equipment. And I put at least a few examples of those things on the board. So I just want you to stop and think about some of the individuals you serve or that you might serve in the near future, and think about what modifications using this tree framework might be useful in your dojo. Okay, I'm going to put 2 minutes on the clock, give you a good chance to stand up and get a good stretch. Ready, set, go. Okay, my friends, let's be back together in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Time. Okay. Thank you for working on that inclusive dojo audit. Let's push on. We've got about 25 minutes left, and we might be done a bit early, actually. Okay. Okay, a quick note. As you're considering how to support students for adaptive behavior, understand that the family involvement, including bringing family members proactively right on the mat as partners with their students, is particularly effective in supporting adaptive behavior. So Garcia et al. In 2024 found that family-based judo programs where family members were actively participating in the same class as their students who needed special supports was more effective in promoting social communication, self-regulation, and higher attendance compared to traditional child-only programs. So let's talk about some of the methodologies of how we teach adaptive behavior. We can pre-teach rituals, mini visual of the bow and sequence. We could use models to prompts to fading the gesture, verbal, and independent prompts. Okay. We could celebrate small wins, specific praise, quick feedback, and build carryover. So we can do that by talking, giving a little bit of homework to the families themselves, where terms and expectations can be reviewed at home. So above all things, I think the most important thing to do to help support adaptive behavior for all students, but especially for students who are neurodiverse or have other differences or disabilities, is explicitly teach and break down the expectation up front. Don't just teach them the rule and review the rule, explicitly break it down. Show them what it looks like and sounds like to do it. And then surprisingly, re-review the expectations, reteach those expectations, re-break it back down if needed at the start of every single class. And if I had one recommendation to help with behavior beyond using good teaching with UDL, beyond bringing family members in to help support, it's this. At the very start of class after the bowing, review your expectations, and reteach if needed. Okay, so 3 minutes lost at the start of class reviewing and reteaching behavioral expectations is better than 10 minutes managing off-task behavior if you didn't. Change my mind. Okay, let's reflect. And let's also create a proficiency scale targeting the mechanics of a specific throw matched with an adaptive behavior goal. So let's look at Ogoshi. Okay. So we have created a proficiency scale. We know from researchers and educational theorists like Marzano that creating proficiency scales is a tremendously good way of approaching teaching and including helping support adaptive behavior. So using a score of 4, 3, 2, 1 and setting up technical mechanics and then looking at an adaptive behavior need that we can align with that technical mechanic. So scoring a 4 would be a fluid, and looking at Ogoshi, we could have a fluid lift and rotation, autonomous kazushi, adjusting grip to the uke size, and then an adaptive behavior goal that could match could be fully participates and engages, independently selects their own partner. And then for a score of 3, we could have a student who shows stable hip placement, a coordinated pull, completes a lift. And for an adaptive behavior component, we could have follows routines without prompts, maintains their decorum during the bow. For a score of 2, we could have a partial lift, inconsistent hip shoulder alignment, and we could have for an adaptive behavior matching section, responds to a single prompt and needs a model for the bow in sequence. And for a score of 1, needs physical guidance to position the hips and their timing is off. And for an adaptive behavior, engages only with continuous prompting, hand over hand, and with bow and support. Okay. We want to try to take these students both in terms of their mechanics and in terms of their adaptive behavior from a 1 to a 4. Okay, so let's look at a partial example using a Sotogari. Okay, so once again, we have a score of 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, and we're working on creating this proficiency scale to help support all of our learners, but particularly learners with differences. For the technical mechanics for a Sotogari, we could have decisive rear corner kazushi, the support foot set close, reaping leg drives through cleaning through uke's weight-bearing leg, the upright posture is controlled, and we have a safe finish. We know a Sotogari tends to be a bit of a concussion giver, so we are looking to still have a safe, controlled finish. And then I ask, if that's the case, let's pause and just think privately and independently. We don't need to partner for this, but I'll give you maybe 20-second think time. What's an example of an adaptive behavior support or goal that could match well with this? Okay, so let's take 20-second processing time. Okay, let's push on. So if we look at a score of 3, I'm going to give you the adaptive behavior goal. So it follows the posted routine without prompts, independently selects a partner, and confirms the roles proactively. Who's going to be the Tori and Nuki? Okay. So if that's the case, what do you think a technical mechanic for Osotogari would be that should score a 3? And once again, I'm going to give you 20-second think time. Okay, let's move on. Okay, for a score of 2 on our proficiency scale for Osotogari, let's say for the mechanics, we have a partial off balance, mistimed or a shallow reap, hips not aligned with the line of attack, a consistent sleeve or lapel control, and unstable finish. So with that in mind, what do you think a matching score for adaptive behavior would be? And once again, let's take 20-second processing time. Ready, set, go. Okay, let's move on. And finally, on our proficiency scale for Osotogari, for a 1 for the adaptive behavior portion, we have requires continuous prompts for transitions and start-stop signals. They needed modeled support for the bow sequences and partner safety checks. So with that in mind, what do you think a corresponding technical mechanic for a score of 1 would look like? And this is our last one. And once again, I'm going to give you 20 seconds. Okay, I'm going to bring us back together. Thank you. Okay, so for this next section, you're going to need a partner, and you're welcome to do this in a partnership of 2 or 3s. I'm going to give you a full 3 minutes on this one, and I will announce the minutes as they occur. I'd like you to choose a throw. It could be your takuiwaza, your favorite throw. It could be, any throw you like, actually. And once again, using a 4 score scale, I'd like you to talk about what the technical mechanics would be and also an appropriate adaptive behavior level that would correspond to it. Okay, so go ahead and partner up. I'm going to set my timer for 3 minutes. And in 3 minutes, I'm going to see you back. Ready, set, go.
Hi, John. This is tech person again. It's Erin. Just a quick question. Do you want to make the slides available afterwards? Some of these I know the
Yes,
text is a little hard for folks to read. That'd be great. That'd be great.
yes, that was my
Awesome.
plan.
Thank you. Okay,
Yeah,
thanks.
I'll send it to Steve and he can disseminate it from there. Is that okay?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Thank you.
Very good. Yes. Yeah, that was definitely my plan. Yeah, you have a minute 30. You have a minute 30.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, my friends, let's be back together in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, thank you for working on that proficiency scale. We have a little bit more than 10 minutes left. We're right on time. Okay, we can also talk about differentiation, which is adjusting the task, the process, or grouping to meet readiness and needs without lowering the technical standard. Okay. Same technique, different challenges. For example, we could use a base throw, a counter, a combo setup. We can have these various supports and reps, visual cues, spotter, timer, and then fade them as skill grows. And we can also differentiate by grouping using heterogeneous pairs for modeling mentoring or homogeneous pairs for precision work and testing. Okay. Okay, here's an example of a heterogeneous pairing. We have one individual who's much older and higher skill level than the other. And then here we have a homogeneous pairing with two individuals who are similar in age and rank. And they actually have a helper with them too. Okay, we can also differentiate by skill level. Okay, in just a minute, we're going to divide up into some skills groups. I'm going to pick the groups today. If you go with Ben right here, you're going to be working on a basic ogoshi. If you go with Sam, Sensei Bingham, you're going to be working on using combinations to set up your ogoshi. And if you go with Tinsley, you're going to work on a counter attack to an ogoshi. Okay. So let me get Harlow, Levi. Okay, so in that group, I chose the groupings and we differentiated based on what they were ready to study based on experience level. So to some of the students, I assigned them just to learn the throw. To some of the students, I assigned them they would learn a counterattack. And for some of the students, I assigned them a group where they'd learn how to set up the throw in a combination using a Renraku or Renzoku waza. Okay, so here's your last task. So this is it. We're done after this. I'd like you to design a brief inclusive drill. So here's what I'd like you to do. So here's your constraint. I'd like you to include one universal design for learning strategy, choice, visual supports. Okay. I'd like you to set a goal. I'd like you to have some sort of additional structure to it, like using rounds or signals or cues. I want it to have a UDL element, and I want it to have some sort of success check at the end, some way where the students can demonstrate mastery. So some of the things we could consider are where's the choice? How do we stop the activity? How will learners show success? So how are you going to build in choice into this activity for the students? Because choice is a powerful motivator. How do they know when to start or stop? And how will learners show success? I think at this point, we should only need about 2 minutes. So I'm going to set a 2-minute timer. Okay, this is your last check. And afterwards, we'll be into questions and answers. Ready, set, go. Okay, let's be back together in five, four, three, two, one. Okay, thank you for being ready and thank you for having those conversations. Okay, let's begin to wrap up. So today, the learning target we worked on was participants will design and evaluate judo instruction that is inclusive of all students by applying a universal design for learning, UDL. And we had four objectives we completed today. Okay, we mapped out the three UDL networks of representation, engagement, and expression. Okay, we did a dojo audit using the tree checklist. We constructed a four-level proficiency scale that was inclusive for a given throw of your choice. And we designed a brief inclusive drill. Okay, so real quick, once again, there are 1,000 ways to do this. It's not about picking one or two correct strategies or techniques. It's about proactively planning how you're going to do inclusion. And once again, there's different methods of inclusion too. The one we worked on today is not the only way of doing it. This is not the only way of skinning the cat or getting this done. Okay. And even if you do use a universal design for learning as a method of inclusion for your dojo, you get to pick the specific techniques or even design them yourself. To a very large extent, the sensei, the teacher, the coach is the secret ingredient of all this. And a lot of this will simply depend on how creative you can be. So as you do this and as you set this, remember, you want to create a design that works for all your students. And as you apply that design that works for all your students, keep in mind that even if you're making an adaptation with one or two students in mind, allowing other students to use that adaptation too will actually increase their rate of success, which can then be faded over time using the concept of gradual release of responsibilities, or if you want to use a more traditional heuristic describing the learner's behavior, shuhari. Okay. So I think we're going to go ahead and stop here. In just a moment, I'm going to open up the possibility for questions. Now, I think you all can hear me reasonably well, but I'm not sure I can always hear you terribly well. So this is one ask. If we have any questions, if I could have you stand up and come close to the whatever is recording for this, and so I have a better chance of hearing you cleanly. So we have exactly 3 minutes left. I'm setting a timer now. Is there anyone who has any questions about what we discussed today?
Your question. Ask it and I'll repeat it. Yes. Yes.
It was a wonderful presentation. It was excellent. Well done. Could we get a copy of it?
Yes. So what I will do is I will upload this to YouTube, and I will also upload to a Google Drive the presentation itself, and I will make both available to Steve Scott, and if he could or Josh could disseminate from there. Does that work, sir?
Yes, thank you.
Good. Any other questions?
What is the most
Doesn't come up here.
most
Because
often used?
the mic's here on the
Sorry. John,
Hello, sir. How are you?
what drill do you find to be like if you had to boil it down to like one of the most common as far as like use for effectiveness across, what do you think is the most effective strategy that you use for your UDO stuff?
Choice. Anything that builds in choice. I don't think you can boil it down to just one single drill or one single thing, but I know anything that builds in choice that allows for autonomy in students, allows for them to invest their interest, is powerful. So here's the truth. We can have the world's best UDL lesson, and a given student who is neurodiverse, even if judo would do them a world of good, they may not love judo. It may not be for them, and we have to accept that as true. Just as for people who are typically developing, judo is not for all. We have to accept that as true for others too. But I think that one thing that really helps and will really empower them both now and the future is allowing them a degree of choice. Finding other ways, new ways to build in choice into everything we do, any drill, all activities. You can't do it for everything. I don't know that that's possible, but I bet systematically we can do it for more things than we're currently doing it. Does that answer your question, sir?
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Other questions? We have 1 minute left.
I don't think we have any more, John.
Okay. I
More
want to
questions.
thank, excellent. I want to thank Josh and Sensei Scott and all the other sensei and coaches here today.
Thank you, John. Thank you very much. Fantastic as usual. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Yep. I'm going to end here. I hope everyone has a great session at JudoCon. Bye, guys.
All right, bye-bye.
Thank you.